So, you've stumbled into another Occult Sideshow. Well, you know the deal. This is where I drag you through the shadowy corridors of history to uncover the arcane roots of the movies that Matt and I dig into. And tonight, we're talking about a core theme of the movie Heretic. A film that asks a question that taps into an ancient anxiety, one that's haunted believers for centuries. What if we got it wrong? What if the version of belief we hold onto today is just a cheap imitation of something older, something truer, even something darker? Then the real horror is waking up to realize you had no idea what you actually bought into, or even who you're worshiping. It's important to remember religion isn't static. It never was. What we call faith today has been rewritten and reinterpreted, transformed, sometimes deliberately, sometimes by accident. But every religion, every sacred text, every so-called eternal truth is a patchwork of revisions, shaped as much by human ambition as by its supposed divine inspiration. And it's not just the texts that change. The gods themselves, they evolve, adapt, disappear, and return under different names. The perception of this divinity is fluid, and it's shaped by the cultures that worship it. For example, take Yahweh, the God of the Bible, supposedly the supreme, eternal, unchanging, one true God. But Yahweh wasn't always alone. After all, being the one true God means there must have been other contenders. Archaeological evidence in early texts show us that Yahweh originated as a regional deity of the ancient Israelites and was part of a broader Canaanite religious landscape. In early inscriptions, Yahweh is linked to the high god of the Canaanite pantheon named El. Even the name Israel itself means one who wrestles or struggles with El, showing that El was originally the god of the Israelites far before Yahweh was established as their singular deity. Yahweh wasn't a universal creator at first. Originally, he had the traits of a storm god and a warrior deity, often invoked in battle and associated with lightning, much like the Canaanite god Baal, actually. Early biblical passages describe him as leading armies, dwelling in mountains, and riding on storm clouds, all traits that are classic motifs for the storm gods of the Near East. Then there's the curious case of Yahweh's wife. Early Israelite inscriptions dating back to the 8th century BC refer to Yahweh and his Asherah. And Asherah was a major Canaanite goddess, often associated with fertility and motherhood. And some scholars believe she was once venerated alongside Yahweh before monotheism took hold, and later biblical revisions removed her from this narrative. And while Asherah may have been erased, her archetypal role existed in so many other mother goddesses that survived in their pantheons. Ishtar of the Babylonians, Astarte of the Canaanites, Aphrodite of the Greeks, Venus of the Romans. All different names, yet the same core concept, reshaped to fit in each new civilization. For the Israelites, the big shift in belief happened during the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BC. Before this exile, many Israelites saw Yahweh as their national god, one among many, but specifically theirs. However, after their kingdom was destroyed, something changed. The exile Israelites needed to explain their suffering, and the theology of Yahweh evolved into something new. He was no longer one God among many. He was the God, the only God. And thus, the old Canaanite deities became false idols. The competing gods of neighboring cultures were rewritten as deceivers or demons or figments of human imagination. And these modifications, of course, didn't stop there. During their time in Babylon, the Israelites encountered Zoroastrianism, the Persian religion that introduced the idea of a cosmic battle between absolute good and evil, between Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of light, and Angra Mainyu, the spirit of destruction. When the Israelites returned from this exile, echoes of this dualism started appearing in their own theology. concepts like Satan as a true adversary, a final battle between good and evil, even an afterlife of divine judgment. They weren't fully developed before the exile, but they took on new importance after it. Sometimes gods don't just evolve, they merge. The Egyptians had a habit of fusing their deities together, creating hybrid gods like Amun-Ra, a combination of the hidden god Amun and the sun god Ra, which formed a new supreme deity to unify different religious traditions. The Romans, they did the same thing, absorbing the gods of conquered people into their pantheon. That's the reason why the Roman god of war, Mars, was originally an agricultural deity, far before he became the embodiment of conquest. Another example is the modern embodiment of evil, Satan. The modern devil, red skin, horns, ruling over hell, that doesn't exist in the Old Testament at all. The Satan of early Jewish writings wasn't an enemy of God. He was more like a prosecutor, an agent who tested humanity on God's behalf. In fact, the word in its original Hebrew, Hasatan, isn't even a name. It references a title or an office, like a judge or senator. It wasn't until Christianity needed a clear villain that Satan became the embodiment of all evil. And where did that imagery come from? You guessed it, pieces of older gods. The cloven hooves and horns, that's Pan. The association with the underworld, that's the god Hades. The adversarial role, that's Angra Mainyu from Zoroastrianism, as we discussed before. And actually, let's take a look at that ancient belief a little bit more. Zoroastrianism dates back to at least 1200 BC, possibly even earlier, and it's one of the oldest recorded religions that's still practiced today. And it was founded by the prophet Zarathustra, or Zoroaster in Greek, and it introduced the concept of a cosmic battle between light and darkness, good and evil, truth and deceit. It laid the foundation for later monotheistic religions. It influenced the Abrahamic religions of Judaism and Christianity and Islam. Even the idea of an apocalypse, a final battle between divine forces, all of this traces back to Zoroastrian eschatology. And of course, over time, as Christianity took shape, it also absorbed elements of Zoroastrianism structure. Heaven and hell, the idea of the devil opposing the supreme god, final judgment day. All of these things exist in Persian Zoroastrianism long before they appeared in Christian theology. Thematically, even the concept of the dying and resurrecting God, which is central to Christianity, isn't unique to Jesus. Osiris in Egypt, Tammuz in Mesopotamia, Dionysus in Greece, Mithras in Rome, all of them shared a similar story. A god who dies, descends into the underworld, and then returns, reborn, transformed, usually divine. So when we talk about religion as a series of iterations, we are not just talking about doctrines or books or competing sects. We are also talking about the gods themselves. They're rewritten, repackaged, recycled, sometimes glorified, sometimes demonized, but never truly erased. And yet, through every iteration, something older always lingers beneath. And no surprise, this is not just a Christian problem. Islam, too, has undergone radical iterations. The Quran acknowledges earlier scriptures, Torah, the Psalms, the Gospels, all as divine revelation that were later corrupted by human hands. Of course, that's the official stance. But beneath all of that claim lies the same kind of power struggle that shaped Christianity. From its inception, Islam was as much a political force as it was a spiritual one. The first century after Muhammad's death saw civil wars over succession, with rival factions, the Shia and Sunni, emerging over disagreements about who had the right to interpret the faith. Was authority meant to be inherited through Muhammad's family, as the Shia believed, or should leadership fall to the most qualified leader, as the Sunni insisted? And for them, these weren't theological questions. They were questions of power, and the answers shaped these empires. The Quran itself, claiming to be the unchanged Word of God, went through an official standardization process in the mid-7th century. The regional variations were destroyed, and suddenly, one version became the version. Does that sound familiar? Even Hinduism, which many see as ancient and an unchanging tradition, has dramatically evolved over thousands of years. The earliest texts, the Vedas, written sometime between 1500 and 500 BC, describe a world that's ruled by sacrificial rituals and was controlled by a powerful priestly class called the Brahmins. Their spirituality wasn't about personal devotion, it was about maintaining cosmic order through these sacrificial offerings. But by the time the Upanishads were written, between 800 to 200 BC, the focus had shifted from external rituals to internal enlightenment. And suddenly, meditation and karma, reincarnation, started to take hold. And think about that. Even reincarnation, something that seems synonymous with the East, wasn't always a core belief. It emerged over time. Partly as a way to justify the rigid caste system, unfortunately. If you're born into poverty, well, that means you must have screwed up in a past life. Just stay in your place and do your duty, and maybe next time you'll get a better roll of the dice. And we can't forget to talk about the focus of our movie, Mormonism, an entire religion built on the idea that Christianity itself had become corrupted over time and that divine truth needed restoration. Joseph Smith, of course, claimed that the angel named Moroni led him to these golden plates that were hidden in upstate New York, of all places, which he then translated into the Book of Mormon. But what usually gets left out of the story is before he became a prophet, he was a con man. In the 1820s, before founding Mormonism, he was arrested and tried for fraud in connection with a scam that's known as glass looking. He had learned all of this thanks to 19th century America's obsession with folk magic. Smith grew up in what was known as the Burned Over district of upstate New York, a hotbed of religious revivals, spiritualism, and occult practices disguised as Christianity. People in this region believed in folk magic just as much as they believed in the Bible. And it wasn't unusual for farmers to hire diviners, sometimes they were called water witches, to locate wells and using dowsing rods. It wasn't strange for treasure seekers to use seer stones or scrying mirrors in the hope of finding buried riches, often believed to have been hidden by spirits or Native American ghosts or even demons in some instances. Smith's own father was deeply involved in these magical practices, and in fact, he passed down stories about hidden treasures and lost civilizations and guardian spirits that would only reveal riches to a chosen few. And so the young Joseph Smith took this folklore and ran with it, claiming that he had a supernatural gift. By placing a seer stone in a hat, he could look into the darkness and locate underground treasure. But of course, most of this so-called treasure was rumored to be buried in Native American burial mounds. Smith and his associates would dig into these sites, claiming that spirits or magical curses were protecting the treasure and that only his divine gifts could locate it. Of course, unsurprisingly, no treasure was ever found, just graves and artifacts that belonged to these ancient cultures, which were looted under the guise of supernatural guidance, unfortunately. In 1826, Smith was brought before a judge in Bainbridge, New York, on charges of engaging in fraudulent activities. He was essentially hustling people, charging them for these mystical services that he couldn't provide. Like, sorry, no treasure, but here's your bill. Shortly after these legal problems, not surprisingly, he pivoted from treasure hunting to prophecy, trading one kind of revelation for another. But of course, even through all of his life, Smith didn't just receive one revelation. He adapted them over time. The early Mormon Church famously practiced polygamy, not just as a fringe belief, but as a commandment. Smith himself took multiple wives, at least 33, including girls as young as 14, and women who were already married to other men. And when he was challenged about all of this, he would justify his actions by claiming that polygamy was divinely sanctioned and that any woman that refused was defying God's will. His revelations also had a way of conveniently protecting his own power. When his members of his inner circle started questioning his authority, Smith received, surprise, surprise, another revelation, one that declared he was above reproach and that his decisions were beyond question. When his leadership came under legal scrutiny, he formed his own private militia, and he declared himself a prophet, priest, and king. And that, of course, was a move that didn't sit too well with the US government. So in 1890, facing mounting political pressure, the church conveniently received a brand new revelation, one that outlawed polygamy. And the timing, of course, was no accident because the US government had started seizing Mormon property under the Edmunds-Tucker Act, and the church risked losing literally everything. So, suddenly, the divine mandate changed. What was once an essential tenet of the faith became an abandoned relic. And this, of course, would not be the first time religion evolved to align with the times. So what if the cycle never ends? What if every religion is just an iteration of an iteration? What if the process of belief itself is nothing more than a game of theological telephone, perpetually distorting whatever the original message might have been? What does it mean for these doctrines declared unchanging? And more importantly, what was lost in these revisions? What ancient knowledge was cut away, burned, and rewritten into something safer? And what if, just like our protagonists in Heretic, we've been left with a version of reality that is nothing more than a labyrinth of illusion and deceit? Sadly, we can't go back and recover this version of true history. That's the real curse of time. But honestly, as we all know, most people don't want the truth. They want the version that makes sense to them, that feels safe, that fits neatly into the life they've already built. The version that doesn't ask too many questions. Because if you peel back one too many layers, if you dig too deep, you might not like what's buried